Welcome, everyone. I'm back today with another fascinating podcast episode. Today with Anthony Pauly, and he's going to share about his 3 near-death experiences, multiple past life memories. So comment in support of Anthony for sharing his story, and then to let me know if you'd like to see more of this type of content. So let's just jump right into it. Do you want to start with your first near-death experience and just share any detail that you're comfortable with sharing about that?
I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I'm thinking it was my freshman year of high school. I'm thinking I was probably about 14 years old or so. That seems about the right age for a freshman. This was way back in like 1990. I graduated 95, so that would have been about 90, 91, 92, probably straddling the winter right there. Back during that period of time of my life, I was kind of a rambunctious kid, and I was a little bit of a loner. And I got into this thing of like wanting to explore and examine wild edible plants. And I don't know what I was thinking this particular day, but it was the middle of January where we were doing midterms at that point in time. I think we had a couple of days of midterms. So it was like right at the end of that semester. So I'm on my way to school one day and I happened to walk past this particular tree that had some berries on it. Not thinking much about it. I'm just like, oh, well, those are unusual. I wonder what those taste like. I didn't think about the fact that, oh, well, the birds weren't eating them.
Oh no.
Yeah, and I decided to grab a couple and pop them in. They didn't taste so great, but I ate them. Initially, didn't they didn't taste so great, but initially no immediate issues. And I didn't really think about this a whole lot till after things progressed. But I started feeling a little bit off as the day went on, and progressively over the course of the day, I just got sicker and sicker and sicker. And I didn't attribute it to the berries that I ate. I just assumed that I was getting a cold because it was January and being in school and stuff like that. So as the day went on, I got sicker and sicker. The symptoms progressed and went home, pretty much passed out fairly early in the evening. And I woke up the next morning and I was feeling even worse. And I told my mom, I'm not feeling so great today. I don't know what's wrong with me. And she assumed that it's midterms. I'm making stuff up. She thought I was giving her a line of bull. So she's like, you're going to school, whether you like it or not, and you're going to finish your test, and that's going to be it. And I don't want to hear any more complaining. So I'm like, fine, whatever. Got my stuff together, and I ended up walking to school. It was a short day. I think I only had like 3 tests that I had to take that particular day. So it was going to be a day that ended sometime around noonish. But I think it was probably my last test. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think I was taking a physical science or electronics class that year. I ended up passing out in the class and like banging my head on my desk. Woke up. I mean, it only lasted for a few seconds. I don't think I did that. I think I failed that test. I don't think I did very well. But so I got myself together, walked home. By the time I got home, it was probably sometime around 12:30 because it's only like a 20-minute walk from school. Nobody was at the house because my mom was working, my stepfather was working, my sister was off probably doing her own classes. So I ended up going straight to bed. And that's the last thing I remember. Pretty much until I started having some pretty unusual experiences right before I had what I would consider my first near-death experience. I'll basically describe what happened during that.
I recently booked another appointment with Jamie of Refractive Healing. I wasn't feeling my best, and there's no one that I trust as much as Jamie to work on my energy field. It happens every time, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. But after the session, I felt like a new person. My energy flooded back and all of my symptoms resolved. You may notice that I don't have many sponsorships on this podcast. That's because I only partner with people that I 100% believe in. I'm excited to announce that Jamie has recently expanded her offerings. If you're curious about energy work, or you just want to try something new, visit refractivehealing.com to explore her new sessions, take advantage of special offerings, and book your distant healing session today. Thank you to Jamie of Refractive Healing for partnering with me in this video.
I would say probably about 6 or 7 hours had elapsed between when I went to bed and when I had the returning to my body experience. And there was this period in between that where I found myself in this space. You know, as a kid, I was getting myself into a little bit of trouble. I was a little bit of a klepto and sneaking around, getting into people's stuff I didn't really talk with my family about. So I was getting myself into some problematic behaviors and associating with some friends that were probably not the best people for me to be around. So when I found myself in this halfway place, kind of like I don't really know how to describe the space that I was in. I couldn't really see much beyond what was immediately close to me, although I could feel the presence of some other beings. I couldn't really see them clearly. But what I could see was that something had been placed around my form. Like I didn't have, obviously, knowing what I know now, I didn't have a physical body, but I kind of had some sense that I had a form. And I had been placed inside of something that would be something visually like a suit of armor, almost like a suit of armor had been wrapped around my body, but the inside of it was all completely, totally polished. It was like super, super bright, shiny metal. And it was almost a brilliant golden silver hue. And it was radiating through my body. And it seemed to be like it was like radiating so intensely that it seemed to be burning something off, almost like something was being burned out of me. And at some point, it was almost like being put through some sort of like purification machine in a sense. I was squeezed back out of that and almost mechanically forced back into my body. And that's where the freak out fest starts. Because when I got back into my body after that experience, and I wish I had more details, but there's a lot. I have a sense that there was a lot of other stuff that I experienced, but that seems to mostly be blocked from my memory. I've tried to do a lot of meditation to see if I can pull that back in, but it's just like a complete wall. And I've done a lot of different meditation retreats and practices and stuff like that. And usually I can get past stuff like that, like blockages. But in this particular case, it's just like for whatever reason. But I don't know exactly what time it was, but all I know it was when I did wake up, it was dark out. And my physical body, I could feel myself when I went back into my physical body. My physical body was cold. It felt cold to me. And I had no control over my joints. I had no control over my muscles, my limbs. The only thing I could do was open my eyes. My eyes popped open. And I could see that I was in my room and the lights were out and it was dark. So it was January, so it was probably like something like 7 p.m. And the other thing I realized is I can't breathe. I wasn't breathing. I had a little bit of a heartbeat, but I wasn't breathing. So I started freaking out and I had a complete total panic attack. I couldn't move my limbs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't really do anything besides be inside my head screaming at myself. And at some point, something shifted and I was able to get some sort of motor control. And I was able to start moving my arms and legs. And it's just like it was like an adrenaline rush, just shot right through my body. And I literally jumped out of bed and threw myself onto the floor and ran to my bedroom door, threw it open, and threw myself out into the hallway. Now I didn't have it was pretty much like I was severely intoxicated. I was like stumbling all over the place. And I managed to like throw myself against the hallway and drag myself down towards where the kitchen was because I was trying to get help. And I got onto the corner of the kitchen and my mother was in there. I don't think I've had the conversation with her about this incident since that happened. But she was in the kitchen, probably cooking dinner or something like that. And I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, I can't breathe, which is completely, totally irrational. And she starts freaking out. My stepfather and his friend were in the back bedroom doing some remodeling work and doing carpet repair and stuff like that in the master bedroom. So I'm sure they had been making all sorts of noise for most of the night. And I didn't hear a thing because I was not conscious. So she starts screaming for my stepfather, and the two of them come running out of the back bedroom. They see me flailing around and behaving really bizarrely. They must have assumed that I was on drugs or something, which I was not. So they came running down the hallway. They grabbed me, threw me to the floor, and pinned me down to try to get me to calm down. And I guess the adrenaline rush was strong enough that I was able to actually take the two of them. And they're like twice my size, both of them individually. I was able to shove them off of me, and I managed to push myself up off the ground, and I ran into the bathroom. And at some point, after rifling around in the medicine cabinet, I realized I hadn't actually taken anything. And then at some point, I passed out and woke up in my bed. I don't know why my parents didn't take me to the hospital, but I guess they must have assumed that I was on something and they didn't want me getting any more trouble than I wasn't. But what's interesting about that experience is like I started having lucid dreams after that. I mean, there was only a handful that initially started at the beginning, but as time progressed over the course of the next couple of years, I started having more and more spontaneous lucid dreams. And I had a handful of them before when I was younger, but I didn't really have them much before that. And it's like something opened up a doorway in my perception, and I started having all these spontaneous experiences out of nowhere. I mean, I grew up at least one side of my family was fairly evangelical, conservative Christian. The other side was non-practicing Catholic. So I had no formal training in metaphysical stuff whatsoever. No real exposure to it at that point, aside from maybe like the oddball suggestive thing through sci-fi movies or something like that. So I mean, that first near-death experience is not the most interesting compared to some of the ones I've heard on your show. But the second one,
Can I stop you and ask you a question?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm just wondering, did you have any thoughts on it after it happened at that age with no context to really understand what it was? What did you think had happened to you? If you are a spiritual experiencer or a spiritual seeker and are looking for a safe community to connect with other spiritual experiencers and seekers to be able to share in a safe space, I've created a safe online community called The Sanctuary. We have a thriving, supportive community. We do bi-weekly live Zoom calls together to connect on a deeper level. And I also have a simple implementable coursework called Awaken Your Divinity, which is designed to be a simple step-by-step process to practically implement spiritual practices that will help you to connect to that love and bliss state that so many people experience in their NDEs, but then don't know how to ground into their day-to-day life. If you're ready to connect with a supportive, like-minded spiritual community and connect deeply with your own divine nature, check the description box in the pinned comment for the link. Also, if you're looking to go a little bit deeper, I am offering 25% off on my one-on-one 4-session coaching package. I offer a combination of energy healing and spiritual coaching to help you remove your blocks from connecting deeply with your divine nature. My 4-session package is 25% off to begin with, what it would be to have 4 individual sessions with me. And then there is an additional 25% off that I'm offering now. I only have about 4 slots open right now. You can book a free 30-minute discovery call to find out if this program is right for you. Can I stop you and ask you a question?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm just wondering, did you have any thoughts on it after it happened at that age with no context to really understand what it was? What did you think had happened to you?
At the time, I was not exactly in the clearest mindset. It wasn't probably till the next couple of days afterwards, where I had some time to think about it. But one of the weird things that happened is after I woke up back in my bed, because my parents had managed to get me in my bed, my mom was sitting there when I woke up after passing out, after like being in the bathroom. She was sitting there on the bed looking at me, and she's like, "Tony, are you okay? Did you take something you weren't supposed to?" And I'm like, "No, no, I don't think I did."
Did you know but it was the berries at that point?
I don't think I was cognizant enough to put those two things together and add it up. But I do know that after she gave me some soup and I had a chance to get something in my stomach and wake up a little bit, they talked me into coming out to the kitchen to have a talk. And so we were sitting at the kitchen table, and I guess they were trying to figure out what the heck I had gotten myself into. And I was trying to explain the experience that I had, and I realized that by the look on their faces, they thought I was losing my mind.
Oh no.
So I immediately just kind of shut up, and I'm just like, "Oh, I think I just had the flu. I was probably just like having a bad reaction to having this flu. I'll be fine. I'm just going to go to bed now." And they didn't press too much harder after that. I don't think they really wanted any answers. And yeah, after having told them about my like the visual experience that I had and the being squeezed out, like I was being like pushed back into my body through some sort of machine like activity, it, they just they just weren't receptive to that. But afterwards, I had some time to think about it, and I was just like, okay, I think I probably shouldn't have eaten those berries. I mean, talk about a like. There's no logical reason why I would have done it. It's just like one of those really stupid, foolish things that kids do sometimes, and on like impulse control issues. But I definitely feel like my personality was a bit different after that. I started making like decisions not to associate with certain types of people that were causing problems. And some of those self destructive behaviors got put to the wayside. It honestly, looking back on it, it felt like a purification process of some sort. It felt a little bit if looking back, it feels like it was a little bit incomplete. Like it would have been probably good if I had been able to purify even more. But you don't have a whole lot of control over that when you've got like spiritual beings kind of guiding the process. They take away what they understand we don't need and leave the rest. But my second NDE, that happened around like 2006, I believe. I grew up in Wisconsin, and I had moved around from a couple of different states, and I had ended up out here in Washington State, where I'm at again. And I was living by myself in an RV. And you know, I've had some interesting conversations over the years with various different spiritual practitioners. And a while back, I was spending some time with this Lakota fellow who lives in Washington State here. And he was explaining some things about some of their traditional practices and stuff like that. He's not a healer, but he knows a good number of them in his community through their different ceremonies and stuff like that. And he shared a little bit of a piece of information with me that I found quite interesting. And apparently, in some of the indigenous traditions, when they do some of their spiritual practices, some of them have to do with out of body experiences. Some of them have to do with intentional lucid dreaming or healing practices where they will go to different realms and work with different beings to help people in different ways. And sometimes what they do is they will have an elder or a helper sitting by, keeping an eye on them while they're out there doing their thing. Because one of the things that they have figured out over the centuries of doing this is that sometimes if people go out into these other realms really far, sometimes they go really, really far out and they don't come back. So having a helper around helps keep an eye on the person so that if they need to be pulled back, if their body seems to be diminishing in its vitality or something like that, they can pull that person's spirit back into their body. And my second NDE was pretty much like that without the helper. I had a really profound out of body experience that started out as a lucid dream and transitioned into an OBE. And I'll describe what that was like. I essentially found myself in a lucid dream I realized that I was dreaming, and it was rather enjoyable experience. So I was having a lot of fun doing it because I was able to run really fast in this particular dream. And I don't know if you've ever had any dreams like that, but it's kind of exhilarating.
I have.
So I'm running in this dream and I'm just like flying, I'm just like zooming over the landscape, kind of like the Flash. And as I'm doing this, it's progressively getting more enjoyable and I'm starting to sing and chant while I'm running. And the more I sing and the more I chant, the faster I begin to run. And the faster I begin to run, the stronger my chanting gets and the singing gets. And eventually, what starts happening is I'm starting to have this like light radiate out of my face and my eyes and my hands. And the faster I run, the stronger the chanting gets. And it just creates this feedback loop. And eventually, I was moving so fast that I literally lifted up off the ground and I started flying through the air. And my speed accelerated so much that I literally blasted through the atmosphere. And I remember flying at the moon. I remember seeing the moon full in front of me, and I was going at it very, very quickly. And eventually, I was flying so fast, I literally like blasted right through it because I don't have a physical form. I'm completely in this energetic dream body, astral form. So I fly through the moon, and I keep going past it. And it's just like if you've ever watched Star Trek or Star Wars, you know, when they go into hyperspace or
Yep.
hyperspeed or they go into warp speed, that's literally what it looked like as I started flying so fast as I was singing these songs that the solar system, I like blew right straight through the solar system. I could see the planets off in the distance zipping past me. And eventually, I was so far past the solar system that I was literally just seeing the stars in the background. And I was flying through the galaxy so fast that eventually the galaxy passed by me. And then my speed increased so much that literally I was watching all the galaxies. And then the universe is like, it was almost like the universe just kind of ripped open. And I don't know exactly how long I was having this dream experience. I mean, it could have been a couple of seconds, it could have been several minutes. But eventually, at some point, I found myself flying so intensely fast that it was just like flying through a kaleidoscope of colors. Suddenly, like a dead stop, boom! Suddenly, I stop, dead stop, and this is something that I've heard from some other people's stories. Something similar. Suddenly, I found myself at this gigantic wall, which looked like a giant wall of television screens. It went up as far as I could see, infinitely up into the sky. It went infinitely down and infinitely side to side. And when I was looking at these screens, it was just massive. I've never seen anything that big before. And when I was looking at the screens, I realized that there were different scenes from my life playing out on it. And I was very intrigued by this, and I found it really interesting. And I could look to the side and see other different scenes, and but some of the scenes didn't look like my life now. They look like scenes from other places. And looking at these like visual images playing out in front of me really drew my attention. And there was this one particular screen. It was relatively in front of me. It got my attention enough that I started moving towards it a little bit. And the closer I got to it, I was like pretty much like almost touching it. And I was at this point where I was about to put my hand through it because I wanted to see what it was like being inside this thing, like inside this memory. And at that point, I heard someone's voice say to me, "It's not your time. If you go any further, you can't come back." And it's like something grabbed me by my forehead. Like literally, it's like somebody put their hand on my forehead and shoved me back. And as fast as I flew to get to that location, the force that shoved me back into my body pushed me back at a rate of speed that was even faster than that. And it's like I literally slammed into my body and threw myself out of bed.
Wow.
I woke up and I was just like, what the heck just happened? What was that all about? It was a little bit freaky. And I felt, when I woke up and I found myself on the floor, I got up and I felt like I was drunk. So that was the second one. I don't know if it's a classic NDE in the normal sense because there wasn't I had poisoned myself on the first one. There wasn't a physical illness related to it as far as I know. I mean, I've had incidences in the past where, like, you know, when I'm crashed out next to someone, they would tell me, "Oh, well, you stop breathing while you're sleeping, and then you like startle yourself awake." So I don't know if it was like some sort of what's the condition where people have that they stop breathing while they're sleeping.
Sleep
It's not,
apnea?
yeah. I don't know if
Mhm.
it's like sleep apnea does run in my family, so I don't know if it was like a sleep apnea incident or not. I've never really been tested for it, but I do occasionally snore.
It
So
sounds like it was definitely more than a dream, though. Like, it has some of the elements of a classic NDE, flying through space and then having the life review and the voice telling you it's not your time. Would you agree?
yeah, it was definitely had some elements of that. But it seems like to me, it seems like it was also combined with having a or an out of body experience.
Right.
And like I said, with some of those more ancient traditional practitioners, they will have the minders with them to keep an eye on them while they're doing this stuff. And in my particular case, I just spontaneously did it on my own without any real formal training. Now, at that point in my life, I had already been studying some other spiritual practices and stuff like that. So having out of body experiences was not something that I was unfamiliar with. I had already been lucid dreaming for, gosh, over a decade on my own. So that part I didn't find that experience disconcerting or upsetting or anything like that. It was the whole process of the liberation of like being free of the body and just being able to be completely totally in my spirit self. It was liberating and actually really enjoyable. It's like it's kind of hard to explain how much more like myself I felt at that point. Like when I'm in this form right now, there's physiological limitations, there's psychological limitations, there's blocks to what I can remember and what I can perceive. But when you're in that state, there isn't, and you can pretty much do whatever you can imagine. And this seems to be a pretty common theme or story around people that have their own NDE experiences where it's pretty expansive. And so that was the second one, and that wasn't one that it wasn't one that that I found to be massively. There was no trauma related to it. It didn't negatively impact my life. It's just an interesting additional experience that I've had on top of all the other unusual experiences. But the third one happened actually quite recently. And that happened actually back at the end of January, February this year. And it was probably the closest I came to not coming back. and,
Okay.
and this one was the result of I had been at a public event vending some of my plants and honey products that I sell. And I either got COVID or I got RSV. And I started developing these flu symptoms probably the Saturday nights right on the last weekend of January this year. And I had not done this event, so I took way more supplies with me than I should have. I had rented a like 25-foot rental truck filled with plants that I was going to sell at this event. And of course, as you know, it's Washington State, and we don't get a lot of cold weather on this side of the mountains. So of course, it had to be the really cold weekend where we actually had snow and freezing rain and stuff like that. Made the whole process significantly more challenging. But by Sunday afternoon, my flu was in full progression, and I was still trying to run this booth all by myself. And then I had to load up all these plants and stuff back into the van that evening. So I ended up not getting home until probably pretty close to midnight that night. And I had to unload the whole thing all by myself the next day. I'm in full flu mode. I was running a fever, very physically fatigued. Probably hadn't eaten enough that day and probably didn't drink enough water that day. And by Monday morning, when I woke up, I had to unload the truck, and I was only able to get about halfway through it before I was so exhausted. I had to call the rental place and say, I need to keep this thing for another day. So that's what I did, and ended up getting it emptied out and cleaned up. And it was kind of a pain because plants produce a lot of humidity, so a lot of the plants had gotten frozen to the bottom of the van. So I had to scrape out a lot of frozen dirt and stuff like that. So significantly more effort than was planning on. Got the van dropped off, Ubered back to my place, immediately passed out. But my system was so completely tweaked out at that point in time because I hadn't eaten really much anything in probably about 24 to 36 hours. And because I had overworked myself, I didn't realize how thoroughly dehydrated I was. And I was kind of having like a stress out, like semi quasi anxiety attack from the flu symptoms. So I wasn't really able to sleep most of Monday because of that and the discomfort from like the muscle cramps and stuff like that. And by Tuesday, having done a whole nother day's worth of work while having these flu symptoms, I was even more stressed. And when I finally did fall asleep, it wasn't like a full sleep. I was kind of like being half awake, half asleep. So I wasn't super relaxing. And I think it was probably about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. I had an incident of digestive distress where it woke me up like somebody had punched me in the gut. And I jumped up to get to the restroom. And I guess in the process of doing that, I dysregulated my blood pressure. And when I got in there, it's like suddenly my nose started bleeding. And I got really, really lightheaded. And I fell off the toilet. And somehow or another, I managed to press my arm up against the door jamb in order not to fully pass out, or not to fully fall over, I should say. So I had my arm up against the door jamb, holding myself into a squatting position so I didn't fall forward. But my nose was bleeding all over the place. I was losing consciousness. And I don't know if you've ever like had an instance where you've been really, really super lightheaded and passed out like that. But it was basically like that sensation. And I could literally feel myself slipping out. And somehow or another, I managed to stay in that squatting position, but I completely, totally lost consciousness. If I had fallen forward with my nose bleeding the way it was, I would have hit my nose on the floor and I probably would have bled out. And living here by myself, there's nobody around to help. So I find myself in this halfway place. It's just like I knew, because of my meditation practices and stuff like that, my lucid dreaming experiences and my other out of body experience, I had a pretty good sense of what was going on. I was I was unconscious in my physical body, but my perceptual consciousness had separated from my body, and I could see where I was, and I was literally standing on the threshold of life and death, fully aware of where I was, and I could feel these other beings nearby observing what I was doing. And I realized that I needed to like use as much of my own personal force of will as possible. And the instinctive thing that came out of me was just like, okay, I better voice what I need to have happen here. And I started saying very loudly to these other spirit beings, I'm like, you need to send me back. You need to send me back. Send me back right now. And I'm saying it very loudly. I'm like, I need more time. I need more time. Send me back. So I don't know. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been like 3 minutes. But I eventually did end up coming back into my body. And I was just like, I came back into my body, and it literally, if the whole experience was very disorienting and emotionally upsetting, because it almost felt like energetically, because of my weakened immune system state and the fact that I had this flu, it felt like I had spent the whole night like somebody was like in the room screaming at me, while I was having these like half awake panic attacks before this whole passing out incident happened. And almost felt like I was being spiritually attacked. So when I came to, I was still in that panic attack state, and still thoroughly dehydrated, but I managed to get my nose to stop bleeding, got myself back together, cleaned myself up a little bit, and then I came back into my bedroom, sat on my bed, and went through a whole checklist of like, okay, did I just have a stroke? Did I have an aneurysm? Because that, like, years ago when I was younger, I was probably about maybe 19 years old, I had a mini stroke after getting a really bad concussion. So I remember what those symptoms were like, and I basically went through this checklist sitting on the side of my bed. Okay, am I having any neurological issues aside from the anxiety attack, the increased heart rate? Do I have any paralysis? And went through that whole thing and realized, okay, well, I'm not having a stroke. I'm not having an aneurysm. It's probably dehydration. I need to drink some water. I need to get something in my stomach, and I need to get some sleep. But it's just like, there's no way I'm sleeping because I'm just like too tweaked out right now. So I was just like, I got to find someone to talk to. And I managed to get one of my elders on the phone who lives in Israel. And thankfully, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's daytime there. So she talked me down off of my freak out fest for several hours. But it was after that last incident that I realized, okay, I need to make some lifestyle changes. And I had, having my business the way that I have it with the beekeeping and stuff like that, it's a very physically demanding business. It's kind of sucked up a lot of the energy that I have for my spiritual practices. And one of the things that I realized after having had that experience is I need to start sharing some of these other experiences that I've had over the years more openly. So that's one of the reasons why I reached out. And on top of that, it's just like, so I've had those 3 near-death experiences, and the first one and the second one seem to coincide with a lot of experiences. I don't know how much you talk about past life experiences on your show,
Yeah, every once in a while.
but I've never had anybody teach me how to do this, and I've never done any past life regression, but I've remembered several dozen of my past lives. And there's been a number of incidences where I have met people in this lifetime that remember those lifetimes themselves and remember particular incidences from those lifetimes and have told me about them spontaneously without me bringing it up.
Oh, wow. Okay,
So,
how much time do you have? And is that something you're willing to talk about? Because if it's not, that's fine.
yeah, I'm totally willing to talk about that stuff. I'm the only thing that I will say is that I won't be revealing the names of any of these individuals.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
If I talk about them, I'll be using a name not related to who they are. So I'm trying to remember which was probably the earliest past life memory that I have, because there's been so many of them. It's kind of hard to keep track of. What Here's what I'll do. I'll talk about the one that was the lifetime that I had that was most recent.
Oh,
The one right before this. So I have a history of my past lives that I've figured out so far, that I've engaged in a lot of social activism. Either I have been some sort of rebellious spiritual practitioner, or I have been some sort of political dissident. It hasn't always been the case. I mean, the interesting thing about past lives is we all get to experience several different variations on the human experience. Sometimes we live lives we're lovely, loving people. Other times we live lives where we engage in cruelty. I mean, I had a past life several thousand years ago where I was a cannibal. I don't remember a lot about that one, but I do remember some of it. It's a rather disturbing thing to think about. But in my most recent one, the one that I had right before this lifetime, I was a social dissident in China during the Communist Revolution, and I had a small group of, I guess you would call, political followers of some sort or another. And when a revolution like that kind of thing is going on, it doesn't take much to get on the radar of the overruling governmental authorities. And at some point, I'm trying to remember, I'm trying to get a sense of how old I think I was at that point in time. I think towards the end of that lifetime, I was probably in my late 30s, potentially early 40s, but I think at most at the youngest late 30s. And in that particular lifetime, I had gotten myself arrested along with a bunch of my followers and put in one of those communist labor camps, where basically you either get worked to death or eventually they just turn around and take you out. But I think what they were trying to do is they were trying to break me psychologically so that they could use that as a justification for discrediting the political work that I was doing. And at some point, I decided that I was going to try to escape from the concentration camp, and I had a whole plan in order. And I was working with one of the people that I knew that I had gotten arrested with, who was technically a follower friend of mine. But that person decided that they were going to turn me into the guards and tell the guards what my plan was. So I was in the process of trying to work my way out of the prison camp by going through some breaks in the fencing. And they were waiting for me when I was doing that, and I basically got shot to death. Now, the interesting thing is the person who was the individual that turned me in to the guards was actually a friend of mine who I was living with at the time that I had this memory.
Oh, wow. How did that affect you to realize that?
It was awkward. At that point in time, that friendship was going through some really stressful situations, and this person and his fiance were in the process of getting married, and they wanted to buy the house that we were living in that we were renting to do a rent to own thing. So I ended up getting a loan for several $1,000s so that they could put a down payment on the house. And I'm just like, okay, so I'll give you this several $1,000s and you guys give me a year's worth of free rent. It's a win-win, and then I'll move out, and then you guys have the place all to yourself. But what's interesting is, like, several days before I actually went and followed through and got the loan, because I took out a loan to get the money, I had this dream that basically someone came to me in the dream and told me not to do it. And I'm just like, no, 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 you can't tell me that. This person is my best friend. I'm going to help them out. This is all going to work out just fine. Well, it didn't. Because what ended up happening is after the two of them got married, they ended up going down to Florida to visit family. They ended up going to Florida and not coming back. So they forfeited on the contract with the owner to do the rent to own. I lost my money and was stuck with several $1,000s of loan that I still had to pay back, and I was homeless.
Oh, no, that's horrible.
So had I listened to the advice of whoever that was telling me not to do it, I would have been in a much better position. But things play out. I ended up moving to Florida myself several months after that, and completely changed the course of my life. So that past life memory of the concentration camp incident in China, I was living with the very person who ended up getting me shot in that lifetime. And then this whole other dynamic happened with the money. But what's funny is a good number of years later, when I was living in Vermont, I was renting a room in a house with some other housemates, and we had a new housemate that moved in, and we'll call her Kathy.
Mhm.
So Kathy moved in. I don't remember exactly what year that was. Probably like, I think she moved in sometime around 2010 or so. And I just felt this instantaneous connection with her, like we had known each other for a long time. We had some pretty good conversations. And spontaneously, out of nowhere, one day, she decides that she's like, I remember having a past life with you. I'm like, oh, yeah, really? This should be interesting. And she proceeds to tell me about this lifetime that she spent with me in China, where we had been political dissidents and we had all gotten arrested together. And in that particular lifetime, which she's like, yes, this was communist China. It was just a couple decades ago. We all got arrested, put in this concentration camp. None of us came out alive. And apparently, in that lifetime, she was romantically interested in me, but I wasn't interested in her. So in this lifetime around, she was also again romantically interested in me, but I was in a relationship with someone, so that wasn't going to happen. So there was all this complex, like, emotional tension around that kind of stuff. But out of the blue, she told me about that lifetime without me prompting it. It's just like, have you been digging through my dream journals when I'm not home? It's like they're buried away, so it's pretty unlikely that you found them. Um, so there was that incident, and like the immediate one right before that lifetime, I lived a fairly long life in the lifetime prior to that. I think I died when I was like something like 96, 98. I was almost 100 years old, which is pretty unusual for me. Most of my lifetimes didn't seem to be quite that long. I've had a lot where I've died fairly young, but the one preceding the one in China, I was actually, I'm not going to get into the specifics of who I was, but I was a writer in England. And the only reason I know about who this person was is, like, I think it was probably 1999. I was living in Upper Michigan, right on the border of Wisconsin. And I woke up from having this really intense dream one day where I found myself sitting in front of a gravestone with this brown haired lady that was sitting with me. And I was looking at the gravestone and I was reading the name off of it. And I read the name and then I read the birth date and the death date. And I'm just like, I've never heard of this person before. I don't know why I'm reading this name off this gravestone, but for some reason I'm compelled to like search out this name. So that day I got up and I went to the local library and I went to an encyclopedia and I found out who this person was. And the dates that he lived and died were the same that were on the tombstone in the dream. And I'm like, okay. And then I did a little bit more research and I found a picture of the person and he looks a lot like me. So I'm not really sure why I have these past life memories or why that kind of stuff comes up for me, but it's happened so often I don't even really give it much thought anymore. I mean, at this point, I would say I've remembered at least 2 or 3 dozen, and it's not like I'm remembering the full span of every single lifetime. It's usually certain particularly significant segments. Sometimes if it has to deal with a particular person that's in my life, like maybe there's some sort of karma going on, I'll see incidences of that. But usually it seems to indicate kind of like giving me a roadmap of how my like spiritual progression has gone through different phases. I've had several Native American lifetimes. I've been African several times. I've had lifetimes in Egypt. I've been a Buddhist monk at least once or twice. I had one life, and I've been female. I haven't always been male. I had one lifetime where I was actually a Catholic nun in a monastery somewhere, but I was isolated because I had tuberculosis. So I basically spent myself locked inside of my little chamber till I eventually died. And tuberculosis is a very painful death.
Yeah.
I was very disfigured towards the end of that lifetime because it can like in some people it can do damage very similar to like leprosy,
Right.
where it can cause all sorts of tissue damage on the superficial tissues and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I actually remember the moment that I died in that lifetime. I was actually praying in the process of it, right as it happened.
Mm.
And then I've had I'm trying to remember. I think I remember a while ago you may have been having a conversation about with somebody who had who had some near death experiences, and there might have been some sort of conversations about Atlantis and Lemuria.
Yeah, I think I've had a couple.
I think I've seen some of those, but I have had some past life memories where I witnessed the destruction of Lemuria.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm curious to hear more about that because I've read about it in one of my Dolores Cannon books, and I'm curious if it's the same.
Well, the whole Lemuria thing, from what I can gather through my own research and my own like instinctive memories of stuff, it was spread out. Not It wasn't an instantaneous thing that happened just one moment. It was kind of a catastrophe that was spread out over several thousand years. There were some major incidences that caused the cataclysm. Part of it was, I think, the Earth had gotten hit by a large meteor right around that period of time. There's a lot of indigenous stories about, particularly around the Pacific Rim, whether it be North America, South America, Indonesia, Japan, where they talk about this giant dragon or serpent falling from the sky and hitting the ocean and causing giant waves, something like 12,000 years ago or so. And there's a lot of indigenous stories from around this Pacific Rim, all telling a very similar story. So I don't know exactly what caused it, but large impact like that can potentially cause a pole shift of some sort. Um, but what I do remember about that particular lifetime, and this one came to me probably around 2009, 2010. Basically, I had already escaped from Lemuria, or the Pacific continent, quite a number of years before this incident happened with a bunch of other people. So I think I was probably in South America at that point in time. But because of my spiritual practices, I was able to do at will out of body experiences. Like I could astral project and stuff like that. So I had astral projected to the area over where the continent was, and I was observing it from up in the sky. while the disaster was happening. And what I remember seeing is I could see this whole temple complex. It kind of the temples looked a lot like Angkor Wat in like the way that they have the very conical pyramidal like structures that go up at a very steep angle. They're not like the Egyptian pyramids that are less steep. These were very tall, several hundred feet high, and but the shape of them was different than like the temples in Angkor Wat. They were more almost like star pattern, but it layered almost like a very steep cake. And some of the pyramids, they would have platforms on top where people could go up there and they could meditate and do ceremony and stuff like that. But there was this whole gigantic circle of these temples in this massive complex right in the middle of this one particular island. And at this particular time, I saw a large group of several hundred practitioners, like nuns and priests. They had intentionally stayed on the island, knowing full well that the disaster was going to happen. And they were all sitting there meditating because they refused to leave. They wanted to face the disaster in this meditative state so that they could overcome whatever fear state they were facing. And I was observing all this from up in the sky, and I could hear the chanting, and I could hear the prayers, and I could hear their thoughts, and I could see them energetically. And at one point there was like a massive earthquake. And literally it's like you see this huge mass of land. I don't know exactly how big it was, but it would have been significantly larger than, like, say, the Hawaiian island, the main Hawaiian island. It was maybe like 4 or 5 times the size of that. But this whole island just literally crumbles and sinks into the ocean in a matter of seconds. And this gigantic wave just washes over everything and it's gone. It's like you can see that some of the temples got obliterated, some of them didn't. Some of them were partially obliterated, some of them weren't. But most of them were at least knocked over partway. But it was pretty intense.
On that specific memory, I just wanted to comment that it does correlate with other perspectives that I've heard, like Dolores Cannon. I don't remember all the logistics of what she said caused it, but she did say that it was caused by like a large wave of water. The island was sinking, or the continent was sinking for some reason underneath the water. I'd have to go back and read the details.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of other different explanations very similar to that. Some of them, Atlantis might have been a slightly different situation. I don't know. I don't remember exactly if the Atlantis destruction and the Lemurian destruction happened simultaneously or if they were part of the same drawn out event. They might they might have been connected but slightly different civilizations at slightly different times. But it was a similar circumstance where I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Earth is actually a little bit wider at the equators
Mm,
than it is at the poles.
yeah, I had heard
There,
that.
there's about because of the way the Earth spins, the rotational forces cause the Earth to bulge at the equator. So if you measure from the North Pole to the South Pole, the difference between that and from one side of the equator to the other would be about a mile. So if the Earth's rotational axis shifts a little bit, that bulge is going to change too.
Mhm.
So that could raise or lower a landmass or an ocean floor up to a mile. And and when that happens, sometimes it's a slow process where there's just a gradual progressional change. So I mean, you get some earthquakes, some small tsunamis and stuff like that. But there's other times where that rotational shift can sometimes happen quite dramatically. So I mean, you might get a change where, like, I mean, it's happened in the past where the poles literally flip, where the North Pole, the physical North Pole, ends up where the physical South Pole is. And it's not always a completely clean reversal. So there might be variations on where the equator ends up being. And once the planet starts rotating like it's supposed to normally, everything shifts around. And that can cause massive tsunamis. Um, and like there is geological evidence through, like, I'm sure you've heard about the animals that have been found in the Siberian permafrost,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yep.
the mammoths and the large animals. I mean, a woolly mammoth is like a very, very large animal. It's even bigger than a regular African or Indian elephant. They have found those woolly mammoths with undigested plant material in their mouth and undigested plant material in their guts. Now, the problem is, like, if you take a large animal like that and it dies, even if it's in a cold environment and it freezes on the outside, it's going to take several days for that heat to permeate all the way out of the body and the animal to freeze completely. And in the process of doing that, the internal organs are going to decompose. So, for an animal that size to be frozen so quickly that the internal organs are still intact and the food that was undigested is completely frozen solid, it would like be taking that entire animal and dropping it into liquid nitrogen. It would have to be frozen that fast. Otherwise, the decomposition level would be like significantly like progress. So this, like, how do you geologically explain how something like that can happen on such a large scale across several different continents in the northern hemisphere? There would have to be some sort of severe atmospheric disturbance, because the only way you get temperatures that cold is if portions of the upper stratosphere drop down to the ground level. And some of these animals were encased in solid ice that was basically kind of like salt water. So then you have this issue of, where did the salt water come from if you're this far inland, and how did it freeze so fast? There would have to be some sort of major cataclysmic event to cause something like that to happen. And they estimate that those animals were frozen somewhere around 12 or 13,000 years ago, which would correlate right around the same time that, like, the Lemurian or Atlantean destructions happened. So,
Just absolutely fascinating to think about how far back our history actually goes. Like, because we have legends, which I've been looking into a bit recently myself, of this ancient wisdom coming down from specifically Atlantis and being passed on to Egypt and eventually getting incorporated into the Hermetic traditions that we have today. But like, where did that come from, and how far back does it go, and what is our actual history that we may have no idea about?
well, I don't know how much you've looked into Edgar Casey or some people like that, but there are strong suggestions that our current civilization is just one iteration of several different cycles that may go back several 100,000 years. And that's assuming, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, that there's not influences from other places tying into, because, like,
Right.
you know, I back in the day when I was a lot younger, I came across a lot of very unusual authors, and the accuracy of these individuals I can't necessarily attest to, but they do come up with some pretty intriguing ideas, like this fellow named Zachariah Stitchin. I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff.
I haven't.
He wrote this whole series of books, the first one being The 12th Planet. It has to do with different civilizations coming to Earth and doing genetic engineering on Neanderthal and whatnot. It's a really interesting rabbit hole. It's very entertaining. Don't know the actual accuracy of it, but there is some strong suggestion that these other beings were part of the reason why Atlantis and Lemuria advanced as fast as they did, as they brought knowledge with them from other places and brought it here.
Right. I've heard that from multiple sources. The Law of One is a spiritual channel text that talks about that in great detail. I think there could be some validity to it.
I don't have enough evidence to say one way or another, but my gut instinct, for me personally, is leaning in that direction.
I actually interviewed somebody not too long ago who she's a past life regressionist or a between life regressionist, and based on her regression story experiences that she had done with people, there were some people who had remembered past lives as some of these Neanderthal like species and actually remembered that process of trying to remember all the details now. I'm just not good with remembering details. If I remember the story where the sky beings had come down and intermingled and somehow changed the genetics of that race.
So I do have one past life memory. I wasn't Neanderthal, though. It was before that. Have you ever heard of I can't remember the specific scientific designation of this particular branch of humanoid, but have you ever heard of Lucy?
Yes, I remember reading about Lucy when I was a
Well,
child. Yeah.
they weren't very tall. They were maybe like 4 feet tall. They were relatively upright walking, but they were humanoid, but covered in a lot of hair. They were
Mhm.
basically kind of like mini Sasquatches. I had a past life memory where I was one of them, and I was in a monogamous relationship because apparently they pair bonded.
Wow.
So in that particular species, apparently they pair bonded. So I remember being with my mate in that lifetime,
Hmm.
and it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um,
I can imagine.
that would have been more than several 100,000 years ago because that species went extinct, if I remember correctly, something like 3 or 4 million years ago. I don't know
Wow.
how long exactly I've been coming to this planet, but it's been for a while.
Well, I just have a couple more questions. I won't keep you forever. A couple questions that I ask almost all of my guests. And the first one, and I think this is a really good question for you because you remember such a wide variety of different past life experiences and different ways that you've experienced suffering through betrayal of your friend and the concentration camp and all the various challenges that you've been through. What is your perspective on suffering and why we experience that? And what do you think is the point of these lives?
I don't think that the suffering that we experience as humans has always necessarily been the case. As far as our human experience in history has gone, I think this level of suffering is kind of a somewhat newer phenomena on the planet. My take on it is that somewhere in the past, the souls that were coming here to be human decided that they wanted to massively ramp up the speed of the evolutionary process and the spiritual evolutionary process. And going through really difficult, dense, challenging experiences was one way to warp speed that evolution. It's like our experiences here physically, part of it is to have a physical world evolution. There's definitely that going on. But I think the primary driver is to have a spiritual evolution. And this is a conversation a lot of other people have had, so I'm not necessarily going to be saying anything particularly new. We are pieces of the divine in a sense, God in a sense. We're like a spark. We're a spark pulled out of God's heart in a sense and placed into a physical body to have an experience. We are all pieces of God. Not to put ourselves up on pedestals, but we are all pieces of God here to experience the universe in a very, very wide, diverse degree of ways. Some of that is like people will take on. I'm going to use my father as an example because he recently passed away. My father was an extremely difficult person. He was a very psychologically troubled individual. He was a fairly abusive individual in a lot of different ways. Psychologically, if he was classified, he would probably be somewhere on the borderline personality disorder, sociopathic, narcissistic personality disorder spectrum. His personality that he was expressing in his lifetime was a complete total. I'm gonna use less colorful language. He was a very cruel individual, and he spread that cruelty out into the world kind of like a cancer. But I had an opportunity years ago to witness him in one of his past lives, one of the ones most recent before the one that he had now. And in that particular lifetime, he was a Civil War soldier for the Union Army, and I witnessed him go with his unit into like villages somewhere in like North or South Carolina. And in this particular instance, they came across like a mixed Cherokee or a mixed Native American of some tribe and a mixed white ancestry village. Where back in those days, some of those communities would isolate themselves in pretty remote areas just to try to keep themselves away from the settlers. In this particular instance, his military unit found that village and they just massacred everyone. And so, whatever psychological disorder he had in that lifetime, he carried it into this one and brought that same level of cruelty with him. But I'm convinced that I don't believe in hell the way that it's conventionally taught these days. I think I've heard you say similar things. I believe that there is a hell state that people can put themselves into after they die because for whatever reason they believe that they deserve to be there. And I don't know how long they stay there. When once we die, we're outside of time and space. So there's no really it doesn't follow a linear path. So I don't know how long a person stays in a hell state like that, if it's a purification process for them to burn off a whole bunch of the emotional trauma of whatever they experienced during that particular lifetime. But I think certain personalities, certain souls will choose to take on the characteristics of a personality that could be very difficult. Like, I believe that my father's soul chose to take on that personality to be who he was in order to play out that character so that the rest of us could have the opportunity to experience the friction and the challenge of dealing with him and overcoming it and healing from it and learning to be more of ourselves in spite of that. And we wouldn't have had that evolutionary experience, that challenge, if it wasn't for a personality like that. And I'm convinced that those souls will take on those personalities, knowing full well that there may be karma involved later on that they're going to have to deal with. But I'm not convinced that the personality of any one particular lifetime, no matter how horrendous it is, dictates the divinity of the soul throughout the course of its existence. I mean, there have been a lot of world leaders throughout history that have just done some absolutely horrendous stuff. Does that mean that God is going to abandon that soul to an eternity of destruction? I'm not convinced of that. It doesn't make any sense to me.
And then my final question for you would be, if you could give one message to everybody on the planet, what would it be?
I think one of the things that we as human beings have the hardest time with when we are human beings is the mistakes that we make, the bad choices that we make. There's no way around this. No matter who you are, no matter how good of a life you try to live, somewhere along the line you're going to make a decision that causes harm to someone else. And if you're somebody like my father, you spend most of your life completely totally running away from it and never taking accountability. If you're somebody that has a heart, you're probably going to feel not so great about yourself after the fact. Self-forgiveness is one of the hardest things that people have the hardest time learning. And I think finding self-forgiveness is probably one of the most important things that we can learn to do while we're here, because we can't really help anybody else unless we're able to do that. And part of self-forgiveness is doing the best we can to remember where we came from. And if we can remember what it's like to have that spark of divinity in us, then we can start seeing it in other people. So, I mean, a lot of the suffering in the world is because people don't see the souls in other people. We don't remember them. Our vision is blocked. We can't see. It's like we're not taught in our society to see the divinity in other people. We see the clothes they're wearing, maybe the hairstyle, what they look like, their color of their skin, how they're expressing themselves, maybe gender wise, this or that. We see all this physical external stuff, but we don't remember the souls. We don't know how to look for the souls inside of a person. And if a lot of people did that, I think that would transform the world pretty quickly.
Anthony, I want to thank you so much for being willing to share your experiences and your wisdom, your life experience with us today. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Could you share where people can contact you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah. So I've got a little bit of stuff going on. I tend to wear a lot of different hats. I am currently running my beekeeping business, and they can contact me at AvalonApiaries.com. That's probably the simplest way to sign up to my website. And if you have a question, just shoot it to me. I'm also a little bit of a fantasy novelist. I don't know if I told you about that, but that's a whole,
No.
oh, yeah, plug.
Amazing. What is it? What is it called?
This is my first novel of the three that I'm working on right now. This was published a number of years ago. It's called Merlin's Veto: Chronicles of the New Merlin. It's basically a metaphysical fantasy novel set in relatively current modern times. It starts back in the mid 90s. But like a lot of things, it came to me basically through a very, very intense dream experience where it almost felt like I went to another world where I was watching a movie. And I was watching this like span of 30 something years of these people's lives play out in front of me. And when I woke up, I heard a woman's voice in my ear. My partner was sleeping next to me at the time. It wasn't her because she was out cold. I heard a woman's voice in my ear tell me what the title should be. So that's the title. I kind of liken it to like it was transmitted to me and I kind of filled in the empty spaces. But if people have questions about past life stuff and they want to contact me, they're more than welcome to do so through the website that I listed earlier. It's avalonaviaries.com. I've had a lot of strange conversations about all sorts of interesting stuff in my life, so there's not much that I can't manage.
Thank you so much for watching. You will find Anthony's link to his website in the description box. Don't forget to check out the Sanctuary if you're interested in having a supportive spiritual community and resources to help you awaken your own divinity and be able to connect to inner peace, joy, and divine love in your day-to-day life. Thank you so much for watching. Now go live your most extravagantly loving